Well, hello everybody and welcome back to the All Saints podcast. Those of you who are watching on YouTube as opposed to just listening on the audio version may be a little surprised to see that we're still not yet back in our fancy studio for reasons that I don't need to bore you with, but go on because I feel like I know you all. I'll tell you anyway. We had some decorating work done. It's all been completed. The place looks great. The studio itself looks exactly the same, but we've got some new tiles and so on throughout the building. But I went down there literally just this afternoon. It's Friday afternoon, 20th of June, and everything was looking great. Everything set up fine, and then the little digital controller that's supposed to connect the cameras to the computer wasn't connecting the cameras to the computer, so I'm not sure what's going on there. But we have a fine team of tech geniuses here at All Saints, which I'm going to be drawing upon. I'll probably hassle them on Sunday, see if they can pull this particular ox out of a ditch. So next week, Lord willing, who knows, maybe we'll get back online. Anyway, there is some stuff I wanted to share with you, and this was prompted by a conversation among some of the men here at All Saints on the All Saints men's group chat. We have a signal group that people chat about, exchange recipes for smoked pork and special offers at Home Depot and other such important things. But occasionally we talk about things which are really significant. And one guy asked a question, and I'll paraphrase it. I won't get it exactly right, but I'll get you the gist of it, and then I want to talk about it for a while because it's a really good and important question. The question was connected with when does a boy become a man, basically. It's the issue of raising young men, and at what point does a boy become a man? Is there a transition, and so on and so forth? And I think we could debate biblical principles and biblical texts that indicate various stages of maturity in the life of a young person and then adult life as well. But what I want to do really is to highlight how this question calls attention to a feature of disciplining children, discipling children, which is actually no less applicable to young ladies and girls as it is to boys, although of course it's differently applicable. Boys are different than girls in some ways. They're the same in other ways. And so here's roughly how it goes. And it's going to sound slightly abstract, but I think sometimes some of the, so to speak, theory of discipline can help us to understand what we're doing. If we don't really understand why we're doing what we're doing, because we don't understand some of the theory, sometimes we can be blundering through thoughtlessly, kind of just banging our heads against a brick wall without really having a grasp of how role as parents and raising kids is supposed to work. So let's just think about discipline in the sense of sanctions, in the broadest sense. What is happening when we have a child, let's say a 2-year-old, and the example I'll use, which is similar to the example I used on the men's group chat. You've got a 2-year-old who carelessly or maliciously causes some damage. They throw something through a pane of glass, or they damage a piece of expensive crockery or glassware or something. When a parent reacts to that by imposing some kind of discipline in the form of sanctions, maybe a spanking or whatever, we don't need to go into the details of that at this time, what are they actually doing at the most basic theoretical level? Well, what they're doing, in effect, is imposing extrinsic, painful consequences that the child will perceive as flowing from or consequent upon the action they've done. There's nothing inherent in I've broken this expensive glass that leads to I'm getting spanked by my dad. It's not inherent in the action of breaking the glass that it produces the pain of a gentle roasting from a loving father. It's extrinsic to the action itself. And what it's intended to do, among other things, is to call attention to the painful, pun intended, reality that doing bad things has bad consequences. Now with a 2-year-old, now here's the crucial point. With a 2-year-old, what you can't do is allow the natural flow of the intrinsic bad consequences to land upon the 2-year-old. What are the intrinsic bad consequences of carelessly smashing a glass? Well, it might be that you need to spend some money to buy new glass. It might be that the glass belonged to somebody else, and there's that sense of grief and remorse of having carelessly damaged somebody else's property, which it might be that it's very precious and it's an heirloom. And you could buy a new one, but it wouldn't be the same because it's the one that my grandmother handed down to me. In all these situations, if you have an adult who carelessly does something, causes damage, they feel painful, intrinsic consequences of the action. But a 2-year-old is not in a position to experience those intrinsic consequences. So what a loving parent will do is, so to speak, artificially create a situation in which the child feels discomfort, which is in some way analogous to what they've done. That's what is, at the most basic theoretical level, that's what you're trying to do when you discipline a child, discipline in the sense of corporal chastisement. 2-year-olds can't understand complex emotions in the way that adults do, and they can't experience the pain and frustration of having to pay to replace something that they've damaged, but they can understand, ow, that hurts. And so the idea is it provides a very visceral, tangible incentive. Now, what's the intended outcome of this? The intended outcome is that the negative incentives accumulate over time, so the child learns to walk in the way of righteousness. This is why discipline in the end is a loving thing to do, because what you're doing is you're training your kid not to smash expensive crockery, so that by the time they get to 14 or 18 or 25 or whatever age, they're in the habit of not doing destructive and wanton and careless things, which will bring intrinsic bad consequences to them. We impose extrinsic consequences when they're young, with the goal that they learn before they get into a position where they could bring intrinsic bad consequences upon themselves. So if that's what discipline is, how do we approach the question of, well, when does a child become an adult? When does a boy become a man? When does a young lady, a girl become an adult young lady? Well, one component of that, it's not the only component, this is not all that there is to being a mature man, mature woman, and of course there is no kind of hard and fast dividing line. It's not you flip a switch one day and you go from boy to man or girl to woman. But one of the elements that fades in over time as a young person grows up is they start to experience the intrinsic bad consequences of things. And at that point, you can start to back away from the extrinsic imposition of bad consequences, chastisement, and so on and so forth, because they're starting to feel the built-in pain of sinning in a world in which you're not supposed to do that. And in fact, as a wise parent, what you should start to do is deliberately to move towards that. This is related to the question that I often get asked by parents about spanking. If parents are committed, as they should be, on biblical grounds, to some form of corporal chastisement, gracious, loving, controlled, not angry, not violent actually, but nonetheless intended to be noticeable, some form of a spanking for disobedient behaviour. At what point do children get to the stage where it's too old for that? Part of the answer, again, not the whole of the answer, part of the answer is, well, it's the point at which you can replace it with the intrinsic bad consequences. Now that's all somewhat abstract, perhaps might sound a little complicated. If you've made it this far, let me reward you for your patience, persistence and resilience by giving you an example. And those who've heard me talk about my own family may recognise this example. Names will be changed to protect the guilty. But let's just imagine a situation in which you've got a young person who really is old enough to know better, who really carelessly is just messing around, joking about, and breaks something expensive. Well, do you really want to be spanking a 16-year-old? I don't want to be spanking a 16-year-old. At that point, 16-year-old can just be told, well, listen, we warned you not to do that. We said, be careful, all you should need, and you shouldn't even need that. But you went ahead and carried on. Now you're going to be paying for it, whatever it is. And we've been in the situation as parents a number of times where that has been a really fruitful learning experience for our kids. It's never nice to see a kid having to spend several weeks of pocket money or whatever allowance you give them, if you give them an allowance, or to have to spend other resources that they might have earned through part-time work. It's never nice to see them have to spend their money on fixing something or replacing something that they've broken. But there's nothing that sticks in the memory of a 16-year-old like that. Well, there are a few things that do. And you see there what's happening is you're taking the shift from, this is a young child, I have to impose extrinsic bad consequences for sinful and foolish behavior, to, now this person is moving towards an adult, moving towards adulthood. I'm going to let them experience the kind of intrinsic negative consequences that will inevitably flow from this kind of careless behavior, and certainly flow from the behavior they've just indulged in. Now, what you're starting to see there is the growth of responsibility. Responsibility is really the key word here. A 2-year-old actually doesn't take responsibility for the stuff that they break. Their parents do. If they break something that belongs to somebody else, the parents are going to replace it. If they break something that belongs to the parents are going to suck up the cost. But a 16-year-old, or an 18-year-old, or a 14-year-old, or a 12-year-old, depending on what the situation is, who the person is, what the thing is that's been broken or damaged or otherwise mistreated, a child of that age is getting towards the point where they can take responsibility, and it's really good for them to do so. In a sense, it's the negative side of responsibility. There's a positive side of responsibility, and we can probably all remember, and parents will have experienced, the thrill of giving freedom to a young person. You know, you can use the car unsupervised for the first time. You can go out with your friends to get bobar or whatever it is that the kids are drinking these days. You can go out on your own. You can have a measure of freedom. You can, maybe if you live in a rural context and you've got a bit of space, you can take responsibility for some of the animals on your land or for a portion of your land or whatever it is. Even on a smaller scale, you can paint your bedroom and you can choose what things are going to go in there. Here's your budget, here's the stuff that, and you get to choose what you want to put in there. There are all these moments in the life of a young person as they grow up where they get responsibility in the positive sense. Responsibility in the sense of, I'm able to take responsibility for making decisions that affect me. Here what we're talking about is responsibility in the negative sense. Responsibility to clear up the mess I've made. And it's just a vital aspect of growing up. It's one of the things that contributes to answering this question, when does a boy become a man? When does a young girl become a young woman? It's the cheerful assumption of responsibility in that way. Now, there's much more we could say about this. Let me just voice one additional thought, just particularly for mothers and fathers to talk about together. Be aware that it's likely that mum and dad will have different intuitions about not just what level of responsibility is wise to grant in the sense of how much freedom to give the kids, when are they old enough to go off in the car on their own, etc. But you'll have different intuitions also about how much responsibility to impose in the negative sense. How much to, in effect, make your kids pick up the tab for stuff they've done which was destructive or broke things. I'm not going to stand here and try and adjudicate from a distance the conflict that might arise between you. I think on balance, it's likely that fathers will tend to gravitate towards exposing especially their sons younger to freedoms and responsibilities of this kind, whereas it's natural for mothers who are by nature, let's say, more nurturing. That's a good thing. They're likely to gravitate towards, well, no, let's protect them from the consequences of their actions for a little bit more. Let's protect them from the harms that might arise if we give them too much freedom and so on. That's only a generalization. I think there's something in it, and I don't mean to suggest that always it will be like that with every couple. Sometimes you have very protective fathers and very go-get-em, gung-ho mothers. Of course that's the case. But it's worth being aware that there will certainly be likely to be differences between mum and dad in terms of the intuitions they will have about what's appropriate when. And that's something you need to talk about. One question to ask yourself is, if you're saying now is too soon, now is too young to grant this freedom or to impose this responsibility, please ask yourself the question, okay, maybe now is too young, but when will be old enough? If it's not right to make the 14-year-old pay for the thing he's broken, when will it be right? Would you still be saying in 2 years or 4 years or 5 years or 6 years, no, he's too young, we should pick up the tab for him? Because if that's the case, you're in the process of breeding somebody who isn't taking responsibility, somebody who's still behaving like a child. That's a way of helping you as a couple and as mum and dad to handle the inevitable changes that will take place in your children's lives. It's all too easy, I think, especially for very caring, nurturing mothers, to want to do this year whatever it was they did last year because they want to care for their kids, they want to care for the little baby. Again, it's a generalization to attribute that to mothers, but I think it's fair. Well, maybe that's right this year, but if it's right this year, it might not be right next year, and it certainly won't be right in 10 or 12 or 15 years' time. At some point, asking yourself the question, okay, if not now, when, may help you to work through those different intuitive responses together. And remember, what our goal is here, I'll conclude with this, what our goal is here is to have young men and young women who understand firsthand that actions have consequences, that God is actually disciplining us through providence. He's teaching us. He is our loving Father who is disciplining us. And that therefore, busted stuff has to be paid for. Sinful and foolish actions, somebody needs to clear up after them. That being the case, we have young men and young women, our children whom we love, who are ready to live wisely and faithfully in the world because they understand what life in the world involves. What we don't want is overgrown kids who, and this is a caricature, but it's a woefully accurate one, have a whole bunch of freedom and no responsibility. They've been let loose and never been held responsible for cleaning up the consequences of their foolish actions. That's not what we want. What we want is young people who have learned that there are two sides to responsibility, and we've helped them make the transition by shaping our discipline as they grow, so it moves from purely extrinsic, corporal chastisement and discipline in that negative sense, to allowing the children to suck up themselves and face themselves and pay themselves the negative consequences of what they've done. That may raise more questions than it's answered. It certainly will raise some questions. As ever, don't hesitate to give me a shout. And I hope very soon to be back looking at you in the eye if you're accustomed to watching this on video. But if not, certainly hope to be back next week. The Lord bless you, and bye for now.